Have you ever wondered how a boy who once bought 6 bottles of Coca-Cola for 25 cents and resold them for a profit would one day control a company that literally owns Coca-Cola stock worth billions? How does a child with a fascination for numbers transform into the Oracle of Omaha, a man whose single word can shake the stock market? Stay with me, because Warren Buffett's life isn't just about money. It's about obsession. It's about patience. It's about betting on yourself when nobody else does. And by the end of this story, you'll see why people across the world call him not just the richest investor alive, but one of the wisest. So if you're ready for an unforgettable journey through fortune, failure, heartbreak, and triumph, make sure you subscribe right now. This isn't a story you'll want to miss.
Warren Edward Buffett was born in Omaha, Nebraska in 1930 during the Great Depression. The country was in ruins. Families were standing in soup lines. Jobs were vanishing overnight. And yet, in a tiny house in Omaha, a little boy was born who would grow up to redefine wealth itself. From the very beginning, Warren had a different way of looking at the world. While other children were playing games, he was playing with numbers. At just 6 years old, he spotted an opportunity. He bought a 6-pack of Coca-Cola bottles for a quarter and sold them door to door for a nickel each. His profit? 5 cents? It seems tiny, but to him, it was magic. Money could multiply if you knew how. Here's a surprising gem. By the time Warren was 11 years old, he had already bought his first stock. Yes, 11. Most kids were saving for toys. He was buying businesses. But his childhood wasn't just about money. Warren's father, Howard Buffett, was a stockbroker and later a congressman. He taught Warren about responsibility, honesty, and values. His mother, Layla, kept the household running, but she was strict, sometimes harsh. Young Warren often found comfort not in people, but in books and numbers. Numbers became his friends. They never judged. They always made sense. At school, Warren was different. He wasn't a star athlete. He wasn't the most popular kid. But he had something no one else had, an unstoppable curiosity. He devoured books about business, math, and investing. By the age of 13, he was already running his own businesses, delivering newspapers, selling golf balls, even setting up pinball machines in barber shops. And here's another hidden fact. At 13, Warren filed his very first tax return. On it, he deducted his bicycle as a business expense. A teenager, already thinking like a CEO.
But even with his talents, Warren didn't see himself as extraordinary. In fact, at one point, he doubted his worth so much that he applied to Harvard Business School and was rejected. Yes, the man now worth over $100 billion was once told no by Harvard. That rejection could have crushed him, but life had another door waiting to open. Enter Benjamin Graham. Graham was a legendary investor, known as the father of value investing. His philosophy was simple but powerful. Buy stocks that are undervalued, companies selling for less than they're truly worth. Warren stumbled across Graham's book, The Intelligent Investor, and it hit him like a lightning bolt. This, Warren thought, is it. This is the roadmap. So, instead of Harvard, he went to Columbia Business School, where Graham was teaching. And that single decision would change his life forever. Imagine the scene. Warren, a young student with thick glasses, sitting in a classroom, absorbing every word of Graham's lectures like scripture. For him, this wasn't just theory. This was the key to unlocking a lifelong obsession. But Warren wasn't just a copycat. He wanted to take Graham's ideas and make them his own. He believed in looking not only at numbers, but also at the character of the people running a business. He wanted to invest in companies that weren't just cheap, but companies that had a soul. When Warren graduated, he wanted to work for Benjamin Graham more than anything. But Graham wasn't hiring. Warren kept writing letters, kept knocking on the door, and eventually, Graham relented. For a few short years, Warren worked at Graham's investment firm. It was like being in the presence of a master magician, learning every trick. But Warren soon realized something important. If he wanted to truly carve his own path, he had to leave the safety of his mentor and step into the unknown.
So, in 1956, he packed his bags and returned to Omaha. Just a 25-year-old with big dreams. There, in his hometown, he started a small investment partnership with just $105,000, much of it from family and friends. Warren himself put in only $100. $100! That's how the Buffett empire began. But here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. Warren's method worked, almost too well. Year after year, his partnership outperformed the market. While Wall Street's sharpest minds were struggling, this quiet young man in Omaha was crushing them. His partners were making money hand over fist. And yet, Warren lived modestly. He bought a simple house in Omaha in 1958 for $31,500, and he still lives in that very house today. No mansions, no yachts, just the same home on a quiet suburban street. That's hidden fact number 3. The 5th richest man on Earth still lives in the same house he bought more than 60 years ago. But life wasn't always smooth. In 1962, Warren made one of the boldest and strangest moves of his career. He began buying shares in a failing textile company called Berkshire Hathaway. It was, by all accounts, a terrible business. But Warren saw something others didn't. What he didn't see, though, was the personal grudge he would develop against the company's management. After feeling cheated in a deal, Warren decided not just to buy stock, he bought the entire company. Out of pure stubbornness. This mistake would go down in history. Berkshire Hathaway, once a dying textile firm, would become the greatest investment holding company of all time. But how did he transform a failing mill into a global empire? That's where the story gets even more fascinating. Warren Buffett didn't know it at the time, but that grudge purchase of Berkshire Hathaway would become the canvas for his life's masterpiece.
In the early years, Berkshire was still a textile company. Warren tried to keep the mills running, but the truth was unavoidable. Textiles were dying in America. Competitors overseas were producing cheaper, faster, and better. But Warren wasn't a man who panicked. Instead of clinging to the sinking ship, he slowly shifted Berkshire into something entirely new. A holding company, a machine for buying other businesses. And this is where the story takes flight. In 1965, Warren brought in a man who would become his closest partner, his intellectual twin, and his lifelong friend, Charlie Munger. If Warren was the steady hand, Charlie was the sharp edge. Where Warren saw patience, Charlie demanded boldness. Together, they were unstoppable. They believed in a simple but radical idea. Buy businesses, not stocks. Don't gamble on short-term market swings. Own companies with strong leadership, timeless products, and a future that shines brighter than the present. It wasn't about quick profits. It was about building forever. Slowly, Berkshire Hathaway became something unrecognizable. No longer a textile company, but a treasure chest filled with American icons. Dairy Queen, GE Insurance, Fruit of the Loom, See's Candies, and of course, Coca-Cola. In 1988, Warren bought a massive stake in Coca-Cola, a company he loved not just financially, but personally. After all, he drinks about 5 cans of Coke every single day. That's hidden fact number 4. Warren Buffett, one of the richest men alive, still fuels himself with sugar and caffeine like a teenager cramming for finals. But that investment in Coke was pure genius. Within a few years, its value multiplied into billions, proving once again that Buffett had an almost supernatural instinct for business. By now, the world was starting to notice. Magazines called him the Sage of Omaha. Newspapers called him the Oracle. His quiet little office in Nebraska was suddenly seen as a command center for the global economy. And yet, Warren himself remained the same. Same modest house, same old car, same breakfast from McDonald's every morning, costing no more than $3.17.
But behind that simplicity lay a razor-sharp mind. Warren studied businesses the way detectives study a crime scene, looking for clues others missed. He could spend hours, even days, reading company reports, not rushing, not guessing, just patiently searching for value. Still, life wasn't without setbacks. In 1991, a major scandal erupted at one of Berkshire's investments, Salomon Brothers, a Wall Street trading firm. One of its traders had broken Treasury auction rules. The company was facing disaster. And who did the world turn to for salvation? Warren Buffett. Overnight, he stepped in as chairman, facing Congress and regulators, defending the company, restoring trust. The entire financial system was at risk, and Buffett's calm leadership saved Salomon from collapse. It was one of the most dramatic moments of his career, proof that Warren Buffett wasn't just an investor. He was a crisis manager, a man whose word could steady the storm. But let me drop another hidden gem here. Warren has never owned a computer in his office. He doesn't trade stocks online. He barely uses email. In fact, for years, he only had one email address, and he almost never checked it. How can a man so old-fashioned outsmart the entire modern financial world? That mystery is what makes him fascinating. As the years rolled on, Warren and Charlie kept building Berkshire into an empire worth hundreds of billions of dollars. But something deeper was also happening inside Warren. He began to think about legacy, about what money is really for. Because here's the truth. Warren Buffett has pledged to give away more than 99% of his fortune, almost all of it, to charity, to education, to health, to helping those who will never even know his name. And this is hidden fact number 5. Despite being one of the richest men alive, Warren plans to die with very little, because in his words, a very rich person should leave his children enough to do anything, but not enough to do nothing. The 2008 financial crisis shook the world. Banks were collapsing, markets were crumbling, people were terrified. And once again, everyone looked to Warren Buffett. What did he do? He invested. When others were running for cover, he poured billions into companies like Goldman Sachs and Bank of America. He was betting not just on businesses, but on America itself, on its ability to recover, rebuild, and rise stronger. And he was right. Those bets paid off enormously. His calm, his patience, and his faith in the long game turned disaster into opportunity. By now, Warren Buffett wasn't just a businessman. He was a symbol. A reminder that wealth isn't about speed or flash or luck. It's about patience, discipline, and doing the right thing when the world is losing its mind. But the question remains, how did this boy from Omaha, who once sold soda bottles for pennies, grow into the moral compass of capitalism?
that's where the next part of his story reveals something even more powerful. For all his financial brilliance, Warren Buffett's personal life was anything but ordinary. He married his first wife, Susan Thompson, in 1952. She was warm, intelligent, and full of life, the opposite of Warren's shy, numbers-obsessed personality. Susan became not just his wife, but his anchor. She encouraged him, balanced him, and brought music and laughter into his quiet, analytical world. But their marriage wasn't traditional. In 1977, Susan moved out of their home. The two remained close, even affectionate, but they began living apart. It was Susan, in fact, who introduced Warren to Astrid Manx, the woman who would later become his second wife. In a twist few people know, Susan, Astrid, and Warren all maintained a kind of unusual friendship that lasted for decades. To outsiders, it seems strange, but for Warren, loyalty and trust mattered more than convention. He once said that what he valued most in people wasn't brilliance, it was integrity and kindness. Now here's where another dimension of Warren shines through: his friendships. In 1991, a quiet dinner would change the course of his life. It was there he met Bill Gates. At first, Gates wasn't interested in meeting Buffett. He thought, what could I possibly learn from a guy who just picks stocks? But when the two finally sat down, they talked not for minutes, but hours. And a bond was born. Bill Gates would later call Warren one of his best friends. They challenged each other. They played bridge together for hours. They even created the Giving Pledge, a promise signed by billionaires around the world to give away at least half their wealth to charity. This was Warren's influence. He could take the richest, most powerful people on earth and remind them wealth only matters if it helps others. But what made Warren so relatable was not just his wisdom, it was his quirks. Despite being worth over $100 billion, Warren doesn't eat like a billionaire. He still grabs breakfast at McDonald's, choosing between 3 simple meal options based on how rich he feels that morning. He drinks 5 cans of Coca-Cola a day, loves hamburgers, and devours ice cream sundaes like a kid.
And perhaps most charming of all, he's obsessed with bridge. He plays online for hours, sometimes with Bill Gates, sometimes with strangers, happily losing himself in the game. For Warren, happiness was never about yachts, private islands, or diamond-studded watches. It was about doing what he loved every single day. But life wasn't always filled with joy. In 2004, tragedy struck. Susan, the love of his life, passed away after a battle with cancer. Warren was devastated. For all his billions, money couldn't shield him from grief. And yet, her loss shaped him. It deepened his commitment to philanthropy. It reminded him that life's true treasures aren't in the stock market, but in relationships. He later married Astrid Manx, the woman Susan had introduced into his life decades earlier. It was unconventional, but in its own way, beautiful. Warren had found companionship, and Susan's memory lived on in everything he did. Even in his older years, Warren never slowed down. He still reads for hours a day, newspapers, reports, books. He once said, "The more you learn, the more you earn." Knowledge wasn't just his tool, it was his greatest addiction. And perhaps that's why so many young investors idolize him. Warren Buffett wasn't a genius mathematician. He wasn't a fast-talking Wall Street shark. He was a quiet Midwesterner who loved to read, think, and wait. And his message was clear. You don't need to be extraordinary to succeed. You just need patience, discipline, and the courage to be different. But let's pause for a moment, because here's one of the most shocking things about him. Warren Buffett, a man famous for predicting markets,
once admitted he has no idea what the stock market will do tomorrow. None. He doesn't even try. His secret? He focuses only on what a company will be worth 10 years from now. Think about that. While the world panics about the next 24 hours, Warren calmly waits for the next decade. And maybe that's why he wins. Even as technology and markets evolved, Warren stuck to his principles. He famously avoided investing in tech companies for years, admitting he didn't understand them well enough. And yet, in one of his most surprising moves, he eventually bought a huge stake in Apple. It wasn't about chasing trends. It was about recognizing that Apple wasn't just a tech company. It was a brand with customers who loved it, trusted it, and would stick with it for life. And that investment? It became one of Berkshire Hathaway's greatest wins. By now, Warren Buffett wasn't just an investor. He was a philosopher of life. He believed success wasn't measured by money, but by love. He once said, "When you reach my age, you will measure your success by how many people love you." And that's what makes his story cinematic. Behind the billions, behind the headlines, behind the myth of the oracle, stands a man who never forgot the simple truths. Honesty matters, kindness matters, patience matters. But just when the world thought they'd figured him out, Buffett still had surprises in store. Because the older he grew, the bolder his moves became. And one of his biggest bets, the one that shocked the entire financial world, was yet to come. By his 70s and 80s, most men slow down. They retire. They fade into quiet obscurity. Not Warren Buffett. Even as his hair turned white and his steps grew slower, his mind only grew sharper. The man from Omaha wasn't finished writing his story.
And he proved it with some of the boldest moves of his career. Deals so massive, they shook the business world to its core. Take the Heinz deal. In 2013, Warren teamed up with private equity giant 3G Capital to buy H.J. Heinz Company, the maker of America's favorite ketchup, in a deal worth $23 billion. It was one of the largest food industry takeovers in history. Just 2 years later, Heinz merged with Kraft Foods, creating the 5th largest food company in the world. And who was standing behind it? Warren Buffett, still pulling the strings in his 80s. The message was clear. Age wasn't slowing him down. If anything, he was thinking bigger. But Buffett didn't just surprise the world with food empires. In 2016, Berkshire revealed it had bought a massive stake in Apple, nearly 10% of the company. For years, Warren had avoided technology, insisting he didn't understand it. But Apple wasn't just technology. It was loyalty. It was brand power. It was an ecosystem that customers couldn't live without. And Warren saw it. That single investment turned into one of the most profitable in his entire career. Proof that even in his 80s, the Oracle of Omaha could still adapt. And then came the pandemic of 2020. The world was in chaos. Markets were crashing. Businesses shuttered overnight. People turned to Warren Buffett once again, waiting for his next big move. But this time, something unusual happened. Warren stayed silent. He sold his airline stocks, admitting he was wrong about the future of that industry. To some, it looked like a mistake. But to Buffett, it was simple honesty. He wasn't afraid to admit when he'd miscalculated. And when Berkshire's annual meeting rolled around that year, Buffett delivered one of his most famous messages: "Never bet against America." Even in the darkest storm, his faith in the long game never wavered. By now, Warren's empire was vast. Berkshire Hathaway owned over 60 companies outright and held massive stakes in dozens more. From insurance to energy, railroads to candy bars, cell phones to paint. If you lived in America, chances are you touched a Buffett business without even knowing it. And yet, for all his power, Warren still worked out of a modest office in Omaha with a small team, a simple desk, and his old flip phone. Yes, a flip phone. In the era of iPhones, Buffett carried around a clunky old flip phone until 2020. Imagine that. The man who helped turn Apple into a trillion-dollar company didn't even use a smartphone until he was nearly 90. That little fact alone says everything about him. Warren Buffett never chased trends. He only chased value. But behind the empire, behind the headlines, Warren was always thinking about something bigger. The future. Not just his own, but the future of Berkshire, the future of his money, and the future of humanity. He began preparing for the day he would no longer be here, carefully choosing leaders who could carry on his vision, teaching the next generation of investors to think long-term, to resist greed, to act with integrity. And when it came to his fortune, Warren made a decision that stunned the world. He announced that he would give away nearly all of his money, over 99% of it, through philanthropy. Most of it went to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, supporting global health, education, and poverty relief. The rest went to foundations run by his own children. To Buffett, wealth wasn't meant to be hoarded. It was meant to make the world better.
And yet, in all his wisdom, Warren never lost his sense of humor. He once joked, "I've been rich and I've been poor. Rich is better." And another time, Wall Street is the only place where people ride to in a Rolls-Royce to get advice from those who take the subway. That's the charm of Warren Buffett. He never took himself too seriously. He could make billions of dollars in the morning and laugh about it over a Coke in the afternoon. But let me leave you with a powerful thought. Despite being one of the richest men to ever live, Warren Buffett still plays the ukulele. Yes, the ukulele. He strums simple tunes at events, smiling like a boy. Because for him, joy doesn't come from numbers on a screen. It comes from music, friendship, and love. That's the paradox of Warren Buffett. The world sees a billionaire, but inside, he never stopped being that curious kid from Omaha, selling soda bottles and dreaming about what money could do. And yet, his story still isn't finished, because the biggest question remains: what happens when Warren Buffett is gone? Will Berkshire Hathaway continue to thrive? Will his teachings shape the next century of capitalism? Or will the Oracle of Omaha remain a legend impossible to replace? Warren Buffett is now in his 90s. A man who has lived through wars, depressions, booms, crashes, scandals, and revolutions. A man who has outlived his mentors, outperformed his rivals, and outlasted generations of investors. And yet, when you look at him today, you don't see arrogance. You don't see luxury. You see a gentle smile, a sparkle in the eye. A man who still loves cherry Coke, hamburgers, and the quiet life of Omaha, Nebraska. The same boy who once sold soda bottles is the same man who now commands billions, unchanged at his core. But what truly defines him isn't the fortune he built. It's the wisdom he left behind. He taught us that patience beats panic, that integrity outshines intelligence,